Testing.
Good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock, so welcome to this meeting of the Woking Borough Council Planning Committee on what date is it? 13th of November? Oh, right. I'm Councillor David Cornish, and I will chair the meeting. The Planning Committee consists of 9 elected borough councillors supported by a variety of professional officers. This is not a political meeting, but a quasi-judicial committee which forms part of the planning process. As such, it has formal procedures which must be adhered to. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and then only those speakers who have registered to speak will be invited to address the committee. There is a strict time limit of 3 minutes per category of speaker, those categories being town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and those borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you say rather than how long you speak for, but above all, please do stay within your time limit. Everyone has had the opportunity to comment on each application through the consultation process, and no one else, including borough councillors, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors or supporters are permitted to address the committee, ask questions or disrupt the meeting. Following the speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate each application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to reach a decision. The decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with that recommended by the presenting case officer. It is important to understand that the committee can only determine the actual planning applications presented before it using current national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the relevant planning inspectorate. We cannot consider whether or not they are a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they are too costly, whether there are alternative uses of the site or more suitable use of the land elsewhere, or whether or not they are popular. Unfortunately, none of these issues are considered as material planning considerations that can form the basis of our decisions. Finally, this is a hybrid meeting with committee members present in the room, while some officers are attending the meeting in person and some connecting via Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. If you are joining us remotely, please ensure that your camera is switched on only when you are speaking and that your microphone is unmuted only when you are speaking. And just I'll acknowledge Councillor Smith's correction that it is in fact the 13th of December rather than November, no matter how much I wish it wasn't. Minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments to make? I've noted to Madeline one correction regarding the spelling of Mr. Marshall's name, which has now been corrected. Other than that, can I ask a proposal that we accept the minutes? Bill, thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. I will note myself that as per the minutes of the last meeting, I have a personal and prejudicial interest in item now 49, application 236143, on the grounds that I know one of the speakers will be speaking against the application. So when we get to this application, I will withdraw and Councillor Mickleborough will chair the meeting. Are there any applications to be deferred and withdrawn? Nope. So we are as we are. In that case, we do move directly to item 49, which is application 231643, and I will hand over the chair to Councillor Mickleborough.
Thank you, David. Before we hear the officer presentation and from the registered speakers, I remind everyone that this application was deferred from the November meeting to enable members of this committee to undertake a site visit to assess bulk, scale, mass and street scene. This site visit took place on Friday, the 8th of December, with all committee members present except Councillor Skuse and Cornish. The presentations on this application given by speakers during the November meeting are all recorded in the minutes of that meeting and will be considered as part of our deliberations. Speakers may therefore wish to focus their contributions on new information or points of clarification rather than simply restating points made last month. I'd like to begin with James's presentation.
The subject application seeks permission for the erection of a detached dwelling and outbuilding following the demolition of the existing property and garage. The application was considered at the November Planning Committee, where it was resolved that the application be deferred to allow the committee to undertake a site visit to assess the bulk and scale and the context of the street scene. As members have previously seen, this is a location plan and an aerial photo showing the location of the site. This is the site layout plan showing the proposed replacement dwelling. These are the front and rear renovation drawings showing the proposed dwelling and the side elevations. These are the drawings for an outbuilding which will be located towards the rear of the property. The officer's report tabled to the Planning Committee on the 8th of November, attached as Appendix 2 to this report, remains largely unchanged, with the exceptions outlined in the new December report. Further to these exceptions, a question was raised during the site visit relating to the comparative building heights between the replacement dwelling proposed and the property at 208 9 Mile Ride. The property at 208 9 Mile Ride is approximately 8.1 metres tall, whereas the proposed dwelling for which this application seeks permission ranges from approximately 8.35 to 8.55 metres. Although this represents an increase from the neighbouring property in question, due to the range of building heights in the locality, it is not considered that this would be harmful to the character of the area, as there are similar heights to this. The supplementary agenda includes details of an additional representation received since the previous committee meeting. This resident raises concerns with regards to the overlooking potential of the replacement dwelling and the subsequent impact to 11 Avery Close, located to the rear of the application site. Due to the fairly substantial separation distance between the two dwellings, it is not considered that there would be any harmful impact in this regard. As there were no additional considerations that would warrant an alternative recommendation to that of the November 2023 committee meeting, the application continues to be recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in Appendix 1 of the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call the first of our registered speakers, Mr. Roger Marshalsea.
Good evening, councillors. If you remember from the presentation I gave in here about a month ago, I was talking specifically about the Finchhampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan and how this application actually contravenes one of the policies in that plan. I don't want to reiterate that again, as the chairman has already said. It's included in your minutes. But it's interesting that in your document pack for today, in item 53, Shinfield Studio, on paragraph 10, there is a very telling paragraph relating to the validity and the status of a neighbourhood development plan. And I quote, this relates to Shinfield. The Shinfield neighbourhood plan was adopted after the MDD and core strategy was adopted, and essentially can be seen as the most up-to-date planning policy for the area. Can be seen as the most up-to-date planning policy for the area. Now, given that the Finchhampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan was only adopted in September, October of this year, the same applies exactly as in Shinfield. It is the most up-to-date planning policy for the area. It's quite clear that in the report produced by the planning officer, that I can find no reference to the use of the neighbourhood development plan in the officer coming to his decision, in spite of the fact that there is a specific policy relating to three-storey buildings. It is mentioned in the policies at the beginning of the document under other, the Finchhampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan. After that, it's not mentioned at all, other than in the submissions made by Finchhampstead Parish Council concerning this application, where those submissions are actually referenced, or they're not referenced, they're copied twice into the document. The second one, which states specifically that this is contrary to the plan.
Excuse me, Mr. Marshalsea.
I shall finish on that, other than to say that given that it has been completely ignored in the officer's submission, I do not believe that due process has applied in this case. It has been ignored. And I would ask you to reject it on that basis.
Thank you for your comments. Next, Pauline Granger, a resident.
Thank you for visiting the site. You will now have seen that a building of this scale, mass and design will be incongruous in this area of 9 Mile Ride and does not enhance the character of the street scene, which consists of brick-built bungalows, chalet bungalows and low 2-storey properties. The roof line at approximately 1.7 metres higher than the existing bungalow is significantly higher than the adjacent and surrounding properties. Also, any loss of shrubs and trees along the common boundary of 204 and 206 would be to the detriment of the street scene. As mentioned previously, this proposed 3-storey building sits along my single storey, so will clearly impact on the light to the eastern elevation of my property. Despite the 45-degree test, the height change from 1 storey to 3 storeys will definitely take light from my ground floor windows on the east side of my house. The dormer windows on the rear, because of the increase in height, will deprive us of all privacy in our garden, a total loss of our residential amenity. The property also, as said before, contravenes policies D1 and D2 of the FNDP, which is the most up-to-date planning policy for the area. I'm not against redevelopment of the site and was expecting a planning application, but not of this scale, mass, height and design, which will have an overbearing impact on the street scene and neighbourhood. A significant reduction in the height of the proposed dwelling to align with adjacent properties and those opposite, replacing dormer windows with roof lights and putting obscure glazing in side elevation windows would all make this application more acceptable and more in line with core strategy policy CP3. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Margetts.
Thank you. Quite simply, this application replaces a single-storey bungalow with a 3-storey dwelling. And as we've already said, the surrounding properties are a maximum of 2 storeys of chalet-style bungalows. To go over, to repeat slightly what Mr. Marshall said, the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan was formally adopted on the 21st of September 23. And the FNDP design policy D1 states that building heights should reflect the character and appearance of the parish. This proposal does not meet this policy. Policy D1 also states that the development of 3-storey housing will generally only be supported within the area of the SDL. Site of this proposal does not fall within the SDL. Policy D2 outlines the preservation of the rural character of the parish. Point 1 states that structures will be viewed against existing built form and wherever possible, development should deliver enhancements to the landscape character. This proposal does not achieve these objectives. The 3-storey nature of this property will dominate the neighbouring properties and will not deliver any enhancements to the landscape character. Policy D3 states that while the FNDP does encourage innovation and design, this needs to be sympathetic to and complement existing styles. And again, I'd like to say it must be noted that like the Shinfield Neighbourhood Development Plan, the FNDP plan has been adopted and essentially can be seen as the most up-to-date planning policy in the area. I would urge the committee to look at all these aspects and concerns that myself, the Parish Council and residents have raised. And if you choose to approve this application, you will be completely ignoring the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan and the volunteers that spent 5 years developing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Margetts. Before we take questions from committee members, I'd just like to remind all the members of the reasons for the deferral and site visit. So I would expect questions and discussions to include these reasons: bulk, scale, mass and street scene. But I'm also expecting members will wish to ask questions regarding the salience of the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan, which has been raised by Mr. Marshalsea and Councillor Margetts again this evening. I want to draw the attention of the committee to two matters in the supplementary agenda, which the officer also referred to: the additional representation from the resident at number 11 Avery Close, and also drawings in the supplementary agenda that show the application of the 45-degree line for loss of light test. So I'd like to start by just taking a list of names of members who would like to ask questions. That will help me. Al, okay, just hang on. Okay, others? Rachel. Wayne. Tony, thank you. And Stuart. Of course, there'll be opportunity for others to ask questions later. Okay, so if we could begin with Al, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions to start with. First one is a sort of an easy one, really, I think. There's on the west and east elevations, there I would have expected there to be an explicit condition about obscured glazing on the second floor windows, which doesn't seem to be in the texts. Wouldn't it be normal to actually explicitly to say something about the openings below 1.7 meters and obscured glazing?
Marcus, are you able to address that issue?
Yes, so in this case, there's one side-facing window on each elevation on the first floor. Both of these windows serve ensuite bathrooms. Because it's not a habitable room, there is a degree of more flexibility that we can entertain in terms of whether they need to be obscure glazed or not, because they're not. It's a service room rather than it being habitable, and so it's used less during the day and at night. That is the reason why, in this case, officers decided that obscuring the windows by condition was not necessary.
I don't think that sounds very reassuring for the neighbours. I would have thought they'd like to see an explicit condition about this.
Okay, sorry. Right.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Sorry, on the elevational drawings, it is indicated as being obscure glazed for bathrooms. Normally they are anyway. People don't tend to have non-obscure glaze. The elevation drawings show a very small OBS for obscure glass for use on those bathroom windows. As there is a condition to be implemented according to the approved plans, that is sufficient for us not to duplicate a condition if it's already required as part of the approved plans. If it wasn't on there, we would have a separate condition.
Al, any further
Okay,
questions on that issue?
No, that's
okay.
That's
Another
fine.
question?
Yeah, well, really going back to the whole Finch Hampstead neighbourhood plan, really. I mean, this is a new planning landscape, isn't it? With once this has come into being, and I mean their policy D1 just seems to have been sort of ignored, doesn't it? I mean, is it because development in the roof doesn't count as a third 3-storey house? I mean, is it because it's 2 plus a development in the roof, it only counts as a 2-storey house? Is that the reason that you not take into account their local their policy?
Marcus?
So the committee report from the previous committee meeting, page 22, paragraph 8 of our agenda here, refers to two policies within the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan. D1 is not explicitly stated in the report. However, they explain its objectives that developments of 3 stories and above should only generally be supported within the area of the strategic development location and the Gorse Ride area. And then it goes on to explicitly refer to D2. So these policies have been considered within the report. What the report then goes on to do is effectively balance those policies against Woking Borough Council's policies, namely CP3 of the core strategy, which talks about how the bulk and scale, etc., and how it needs to be appropriate. And because whilst technically it can be viewed as 3 stories of development because we have 3 floors, the report goes on to say that because it visually appears as a 2.5 story dwelling where the 3rd floor accommodation is within the roof, and because that is not dissimilar from other examples within the area, and because of the height being seen as appropriate as well, on balance, that has been viewed as acceptable and then recommended for approval.
So we're saying that because the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Plan isn't specific enough about how it defines a 3-story building, that it's not being taken into account.
So the report does acknowledge that the proposal fails to address D1 of the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan. However, it has then gone on to balance that conflict with the merits of the scheme and how it complies with other policies, which resulted in the balanced decision to recommend approval.
Yeah, I think how the report is absolutely consistent throughout in its reference to this being a 3-story building, although it does have the appearance from the road of being 2-storied. Okay, so that is absolutely clear, from the report. Would anybody? I've got the list of speakers in front of me, but is there anybody who would like to ask some further questions on this issue of policy D1 in the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan? Wayne, specifically on this issue.
So I have great sympathy for a community that have spent 5 years in producing a neighbourhood plan. And then at the first hurdle, that comes to the planning committee with an officer recommendation to refuse against one of the very policies in that plan. I don't really want to get into the semantics of when is a 3-story building not a 3-story building. It's got 3 floors. And it's very clear in that plan where a 3-story building, property, dwelling would be suitable in the location of Finch Hampstead, Gorse Ride, or the other strategic area, which is Finch Hampstead Parish. So I think tonight, the question for this committee is, we are asked to balance between D1 and WBC's policy of CP3 as to whether we think it's suitable. But I can assure you I will be voting against it because I'm not going against the wishes of a community that has spent 5 years developing a plan, and too many times the neighbourhood plans just get washed away. We've had inspectors do it in Shinfield, and now we're expected to do it. Well, I won't.
Thank you, Wayne. Are there any further questions or comments on this specific matter of policy D1?
For me, looking at page 37, the front elevation, it looks like a 2-story building for me, okay? And would this plan also, would their neighborhood plan stop somebody from putting dormer windows in their loft? Because that's exactly what it looks like. It looks like dormer windows in somebody's loft.
Okay. I think I have sympathy with Councillor Smith's comments about not getting dragged into the semantics of whether this is.
Could I have a question? Could I have the officer say whether it is a 3-story building?
Well, the report is absolutely clear and consistent throughout. It is described as being a 3-story building. Brian?
So yes, thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, Wayne, and the third party speakers there. The point Al made about the consistency with the Finch Hampstead neighbourhood plan and the officer recommendation does come down to the fact that the development plan, in this case, the Finch Hampstead neighbourhood plan, is our starting point. As with our local plan, if we're looking at dwellings in the countryside or anything like that, the starting point is the development plan sets out what is or is not acceptable. In this case, it's clear D1 sets out the aspiration that 3-storey dwellings are only normally acceptable in the designated areas, the strategic development locations. Now, obviously, applications have to be determined in accordance with the development plan, so the Finch Hampstead neighbourhood development plan, unless there are material considerations which indicate otherwise. The same applies to our local plan, the same applies to neighbourhood plans. Okay, there's no difference. They are the development plan. And when we are weighing up whether harm is sufficient because of that conflict, so in this case, a accommodation in the roof, is that harm sufficient for us to make a decision to refuse, or is the Finch Hampstead neighbourhood development plan clearing what it is asking, but the harm in this case, this specific circumstance of what appears to officers in the report to be a 2-storey building with accommodation in the roof, is that sufficiently harmful? Does it cause harm that we would then defend a refusal on that policy? Now, the conclusion of officers is clear, as committee members know. I guess that's where we're at. There is no dispute over the status of the Finch Hampstead neighbourhood development plan as the most up-to-date development plan document, as there would be no dispute if our local plan was updated tomorrow. But that will not stop development from needing to be considered that doesn't necessarily accord with the policies within it. It is a question of harm and identifying where that harm lies. So then we come back to the scale, bulk and massing and impact on character of the area. If we cannot demonstrate where that harm lies, then we don't have a great chance of defending an appeal. Thank you. Hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Are there any further questions on the issue of D1? Anthony?
Yes, I agree with what Rochelle was saying, that the appearance of, as on page 37, is of a 2-storey house. And certainly, although I wasn't able to join you on the site visit, I did walk along 9 Mile Road from Kilnride down to this dwelling, and there are at least 2 or 3 houses that are of that sort of scale and things. So if you had a house that appeared like that and a resident wished to put a loft conversion in there, would we object to that? If you know, look at the appearance of that.
Brian?
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. Ultimately, it would come down to a question of harm. And ultimately, if there is no harm, whilst strictly speaking, it has 3 floors, that has not been a determinant of harm in the past. The Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan is clear that 3-storey buildings, whether the intention of the plan was to prevent loft conversions, that's not clear from the policies, but it's worth officers clarifying that the supporting text to that policy says there may be circumstances elsewhere. It acknowledges it has that flexibility, which all plans should have, to accommodate acceptable proposals, but also resist inappropriate 3-storey buildings. Officers' conclusion is this is not an inappropriate 3-storey building.
Thank you. Before we return to the list of councillors wishing to ask questions, I would like to stay with the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan and ask a question myself, specifically about policy D2. Paragraph 8 at the bottom of page 22 suggests that the reasons for policies D2 are, firstly, to maintain separation of settlements, and secondly, to complement relevant landscape characteristics. So I've got a 2-part question. Does the first of these, reasons to maintain separations of the settlement supply in this instance. And secondly, in this setting is complementing relevant landscape characteristics equivalent to the street scene.
Yes, so in terms of maintaining the separation of settlements, no, it doesn't apply in this case because we are within settlement. That policy is referring to, that part of the policy is referring to clusters of houses in the countryside and maintaining a separation between those and other smaller settlements. Whilst we are in Finchampstead North, which is a development location, it's within settlement limits. Secondly, yes, the relevant landscape characteristics are talking about the street scene and the suburban character of the area. So yes, it's the landscape characteristics, is the built form and suburban feel.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Are there any further questions relating at this point to the Finchampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan? We can, of course, return to this at any point if people wish. Okay, so next on the list was Rochelle. Do you have a new line of questioning?
There were some other buildings nearby, a very large massing building, a white building that overlooked almost all of the areas there, and it was only supposedly a two-story building. It was about 2 houses down. And when we were looking at it, we could see it standing way above everybody's house. Now, to me, that says that's also pretty tall, and they could also see in the back garden of everybody else along the way there. But no one seems to be objecting to that house. It's been there for a while, yes, but it's not out of keeping then for overlooking a little bit.
Okay, Marcus, can you comment on that, including the additional information that you provided about the height of the property I think Rochelle is referring to?
Yeah, so after we saw that building on the site visit, another officer got exact details of the height and found that this proposal is around 20 to 30 centimetres above that building, which would not be particularly noticeable from the street scene when you're walking up and down. In terms of overlooking, potential overlooking, that sort of arrangement is not uncommon in a sort of suburban area. And that's another reason why the total height of the building, including having the dormer at the rear, is deemed acceptable, because we do not believe that it would introduce any adverse overlooking because it's not out of character.
Thank you, Marcus. Just for clarification, I'm assuming we're talking about number 208, the property at number 208?
Yes.
Okay, and I think that in your oral presentation, Marcus, you said that the height of number 208 was 8.1 metres.
Yes, that's correct.
Good, and the maximum height of the proposed dwelling is 8.55 metres.
The range of heights I've been given is between 8.35 to 8.55. That's an approximate figure. And I believe 8.55 is the maximum it could be.
Thank you, Marcus. No? Tony, do you have a new line of questioning? Stuart? Okay. I do have a couple of other questions. Many of the concerns relating to this application have expressed concern about the overdevelopment of the site. I think a lot of the information, relevant information here, has helped to address those concerns. I was trying to address those concerns. For instance, there's additional information, updated information about separation distances and also about amenity space. One of the things, though, that I think is not addressed in the report, and I apologise if I have overlooked this, is how much would the footprint of the buildings on the site change if the application was approved?
Yeah, so the footprint of the replacement dwelling has been addressed in paragraph 15, and that's on page 23. The reasoning why the increase in footprint is deemed acceptable is because the 2-story element, the 2 to 3 story element of the proposal is effectively only above the current footprint of the current bungalow, with exception of a small infill at the front. So the 2 to 3 story element of the replacement dwelling is effectively just above the existing bungalow. And then where it is being expanded to the side and rear is single story only. So that is why it has been, that increase in footprint has been deemed acceptable, because it is essentially, when compared to the current arrangement, is only single story at the side and rear.
Okay, Wayne?
Could I just ask a supplementary to that, Andrew? Yeah.
Of course.
We don't normally look at footprint, we look at volumes. So when we're looking at volumes in countryside or greenbelt or anywhere, we look at, and in this case, bulk scale mass. What is the volume increase of this versus the existing bungalow? The volume, not interested in the footprint.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. We don't calculate volume for domestic extensions, alterations, replacement dwellings with inside settlement, established settlements. There is no numerical policy requirement on disproportionate increase. It is, again, it comes back to harm, as I was saying earlier, and ultimately any increase in footprint or volume is considered not based on what was there, but whether what is being proposed causes an unacceptable relationship. The plot itself, front to back, is 52 metres, and the replacement dwelling has a depth of 16. So in terms of proportionality, the question officers are asking is a dwelling of that scale on that plot unacceptable, bearing in mind an established and a relatively mature character of the area with a number of substantial dwellings in much smaller plots. So again, if that is causing harm, we would need to identify how.
Thank you, Brian. Any further questions? Okay, would anybody like to make a proposal?
Sorry, Chair. When you say make a proposal for what? A different recommendation to the one of the officer?
The proposal would be either to accept the recommendation of the officers or to propose an alternative recommendation.
I would propose an alternative recommendation.
Okay, and what would that be?
I would propose it simply as in page 30 of the pack, and as the wording from Finchampstead Parish Council, who I understand were the main authors of the FNDP, and it's basically contrary to their policy D1 relating to the buildings and as set out in that paragraph.
Okay, I have to ask if you have a seconder for that proposal, but of course, I wish all members to be very cognizant of the explanation that officers have given about the salience of the FNDP. Sorry, seconder? Okay, Stuart, thank you. Okay, we do need to go to a vote. Okay, all of those. So your recommendation, okay, is for refusal, and the grounds for refusal are, there's only one ground you're citing for refusal, and that is that it is not compliant with the Finchampstead neighbourhood development plan, and specifically policies D1, D2.
And if you want some more on that, you can also put in there the bulk scale and mass of that of that property. We've heard this evening about another property, but that was built many years ago. It's got no relevance to this. This is a new plan that's been developed by the community over 5 years.
Right. Okay, so we do need to go straight to the vote. Okay, those in favour of refusing this application for the reasons given, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. Those against? And there are no abstentions, so this application is refused. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now taking back the chair from Councillor Mickleborough, and we move on to item 50, which is application 230099, land to the south of Gazelle Close in Winnersh. And I'm flicking through the case officer is Mark. Well, there you go, Mark, where's yours?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just give a brief presentation, just refer members to some of the updates. So as you can see on the screen, this is the full application for the proposed erection of a food store, associated access parking, servicing areas, landscaping, and other associated works to include solar panels to the roof. So this is the location plan with the site outlined in red. You can see Winnersh Fields Business Park and Wicks around the site, and also Gazelle Close. To show it in a bit more context, this is an aerial photograph just outlining some of the key features around. You can see the site outlined in red with some of the neighbouring buildings. Again, you've got Hatch Farm Way to the south, Showcase Roundabouts to the west, and the River Loddon further as well. This is a more zoomed in aerial photo just to show the application site and the surrounding context to it. Again, you can see there's neighbouring buildings in Winnersh Fields and Wicks, Holford and Pets at Home as well, and the car parks. This is the site plan, just showing where the building will go and where the car parking will go. And I've got some elevations in a second to show you. But again, you can just see where the building is going on site. Should it be located either towards the east side, and you can see the access road as well to the north there. Members who are on the site visit would note that the access road is broadly in the same location as where the extant access has been laid at the moment. These are the elevations. So starting with the top elevation, this is the elevation that will front onto Gazelle Close. So this is the one that you'll see when you're travelling from Reading Road to the site. So with the good glazed frontage, you might be able to see to the left, you can just see some sort of small bike stands. So this is where the cycle parking area would be for the public. The elevation, this is the south elevation. This is the one which would front onto the bank of trees to the south, then the Hatch Farm Way further. So if you glimpse the building via Hatch Farm Way, that would likely be the elevation you would see. So the top elevation, hopefully you can make that. Sorry, the plan's quite big, but this is the elevation you'd mainly see from the public, from the car park to the store. You may be just able to see as well, I'll just put my cursor there to make it a bit easier. These are the voids underneath the building. They look black on here, but they are, when you zoom in, they do have grills on them. And below it is the east elevation, and that is the elevation that will front onto Winnesh Fields or back onto. This is just a CGI image of how the store would look from the access. You can see the steps up, and also there's some mobility ramps as well. And this is a site section. So this shows the scale of the building in comparison to the buildings in Winnesh Fields. As you see, it's slightly lower. It has a mono-pitched roof, and it's broadly just above the eaves of that building, as you can see. And this is the floor plan of the building. You can see the main bulk of it is the actual store. There's storage areas around it with some staff areas and sort of loading bays. And you can just see you can see my cursor, the cycle area, just there, the public cycle area. There are actually 2 cycle spaces within the building as well. This is the roof plan showing the solar. So just some quick photos. So the top one is from Reading Road, just looking at Gazelle Close, and the building would sort of roughly be sort of the gap between Holfords and that tree, where sort of just beyond the arrow. And again, this the below photo is just sort of stood more in Gazelle Close, and you can see Wicks, and that's the site there. Where the arrow is pointing would actually be the car park. It would be more located to the left of that, the actual building itself. So these are just some images from the applicant's landscape and visual assessment. Again, it just shows it from Gazelle Close, and the building itself would be sort of more closer towards the Winnesh Fields building over to the left. Moving on to the bottom, this is just from Gazelle Close, just showing the site, and the axis is roughly where that white van is, but I'll show you in another slide. Again, the top one is just from Gazelle Close, just showing the building. You can see Winnesh Fields there, and you can see the axis there, the existing axis that is, that's just been stopped up and partially laid. This is just a photo facing east. So this is stood, you can see the axis just to the right where those concrete blocks are. And this is sort of the service road to Wicks, this part. So it's just stood looking back out. And again, this is just facing west, just for clarity. It is much like the other photos, the top left one just showing the site with scrub and tree belt beyond. And again, the sort of small montage below. So this is from Hatch Farm Way. So you can see the belt of trees there, which should be retained apart from some small trees which are being removed. You might just be able to see a slight brown colouring of the gable end of Winnesh Fields through the trees there. So it'd just be to the left of that, the building. You might be able to also make out as well the sort of embankment around that, where you can just sort of see the tree planting, but there is sort of an embankment around that part of the site, or that part of the country park, I think it is there. So I'll just move on to the members update quick. So there are some members. Obviously they're in the supplementary agenda, so I won't go through them in absolute detail, but I will just sort of highlight what we're intending to do. So I think from the site visit and from the chairman's briefing, some questions came out and further clarity. So we thought it'd be helpful to members to provide that in this. So essentially, the first part of it just goes into the EA's objection and how more detail of how we feel they've addressed that. So, so in essence, the third one states about addressing sort of climate change allowance for flooding, and I think the applicant's drainage consultant sort of sets out how that's been taken into account. So they've actually, if I just quickly read one of the relevant bits, it says the FRA uses a design level for a 1 in 100 year event plus a 20% increase in river levels as an allowance for climate change. This is a larger climate change allowance than the 14% stipulated. When it says 14% stipulated, it's referring back to the Environment Agency's response. So it's a worst case scenario. For clarity, the design flood level is using 39.34, which is the 1 in 100 flood level, plus a 20% climate change allowance. So the response is actually saying that it's going further than what's stipulated by the EA there. Moving on to the next point that we sort of drew out was the Environment Agency's concerns about using voids underneath the building. And I won't go through it in detail, but essentially the applicant's drainage engineer has given sort of 4 bullet points of why they feel it's acceptable there, and they've gone into it in detail. And overall, our drainage engineer has seen that. So as the lead local flood authority, he is happy with that information and that it addresses what it needs to address. And also, sort of worth mentioning that as the lead local flood authority, our drainage engineer has actually said there would be some flood risk benefits in terms of the scheme and its sort of additional flood storage. And then moving on to highways, there was obviously impacts on the network, and that was and the junction. That was one of the things that came out in the objection letters as well. So what we've just highlighted some further information there is that in the PM peak there'd be sort of a one vehicle queuing broadly, and with the development there would be respectively greater queuing between 8 and 4 vehicles. And the council's high engineer, who's with us, has said that this is not a major impact, and the junction has capacity to take that. I think conversely as well, there were some alternatives suggested around that junction, and they all showed worse queuing, essentially. So leaving it as it was the best option on the table. In terms of the additional trips, overall there in Reading Road, there'd be a 7% increase in the weekday peak and a 17% increase during the Saturday peak. I would just highlight that those are just that section of Reading Road, and obviously once they dissipate into the wider highway network, that would be a negligible impact. And again, our high engineer is more than satisfied with the overall impact on the network. The third part of that is the conditions. So it was just in the flooding and drainage condition, we added another clause, just make it more explicit about the voids underneath the building needing to be regularly maintained. We felt it was just sort of better to do that, to just highlight that. The other conditions as well is just a change to the triggers of them, whether it needs to be prior to commencement or occupation. So we've changed that to make it, we feel, more workable and more compliant with the framework. So that's the members' update. There was a couple of verbal updates that I need to give you. One of them is we had a representation from Councillor Prue Bray, which came in a day or so ago. So you will note she is a local member, and her original comments are within the officer report. And I'll just briefly read what she says. So she says, having reviewed the report in the agenda, in particular the fact that permission was granted for an earlier development on the same site, notwithstanding the flood risk, I am happy to support this application. I do have some concerns about vehicles that turn right out of Gazelle Close, but highway officers are content that the current configuration of the junction will cope with the traffic levels. I do think that there will be benefits from having an additional food store in Winnersh, not least because it will provide competition to Sainsbury's and help residents with a more affordable option for their food shopping. It will also provide employment opportunities, which I welcome. So that's really just to bring out that's come in. The other additional verbal update that I need to give members is in the officer report. Obviously, the recommendation is subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement for an employment skills plan or contribution in lieu, as is sort of the standard. But it did, it did transpire that we do, if members are recommended to approve the application, we do need to notify the Secretary of State and give them 21 days to comment to see if they want to call the application in. So in a nutshell, it just means after this decision, if it's for an approval, we would need to consult the Secretary of State and ask if they want to call the application in. Unfortunately, it does need to be done after a committee recommendation. It can't be done before. So it's just sort of highlighting that members would need to give us 21 days for that to occur. Notwithstanding, there would probably likely be the legal agreement still being determined as well. So just that's how in this sort of committee in the officer report, that's how we would have put it if we would have done it. So it's just sort of saying there that we would, in a nutshell, we would need to consult the Secretary of State for 21 days afterwards. So to conclude, Chairman, the application, as I say, is recommended for approval subject to the recommended conditions, Section 106 for an employment skills plan or contribution in lieu, and consulting the Secretary of State as per I've advised. I'd be happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for that comprehensive report. We have two speakers, both in favour of the application. Both speakers, which is Mr. Williams and Mr. Singh, are categorised in as the same type of speaker. You're both supporters as opposed to town and parish councillors or the other groups. So I'm going to have to ask you to try and share the 3 minutes that you have between you. Who'd like to speak first? Mr. Williams? Would Mr. Singh like to go and sit beside you at the same time? That makes it easier to change over. Yeah.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Committee. I'm Alan Williams from Planning Potential, planning agent for Aldi. Aldi's planning application for a new discount community food store represents an exciting multi-million pound investment into the local economy and will deliver beneficial development on an undeveloped site. There is currently no discount food store in Winnersh. Residents therefore have to travel some distance to shop at an Aldi store. This proposal will fulfil a complementary neighbourhood shopping role and provide these residents with an improved retail offer, delivering a convenient and local shopping facility and reducing the need to travel further afield. Aldi will also provide around 40 job opportunities for the local community at varying levels with a mix of full and part-time positions. And Aldi has recently announced that they will be the first food store to pay at least £12 an hour from February. The application has addressed all the necessary issues and have been assessed in detail by officers, and the proposed development is considered acceptable. It is also important to note that planning permission for a new workshop, showroom and car park on this site was previously granted and implemented and is extant. It has been demonstrated and agreed with officers that the proposed development will not result in a significant adverse impact on relevant centres, and there are no sequentially preferable sites. The retail impact and sequential tests are therefore passed. Aldi appreciates that parts of the proposed car park are located within the functional floodplain, and concerns have been raised regarding flooding on the site. We have worked closely with officers to mitigate these concerns in this regard. Drainage officers at the council agree that the proposed development is acceptable and a betterment on the previous extant planning permission. But to give further reassurance, Aldi will prepare a flood response plan to outline the procedures in the unlikely event of flooding at the site. We also acknowledge that some concerns have been raised regarding vehicle access, particularly at Reading Road. Aldi has worked extensively with the highways officers, looking at a number of options to establish the best access arrangement for the site. Following thorough assessments and modelling, officers agree that the proposed access onto Reading Road, which maintains the existing arrangement and the development as a whole, is acceptable. Aldi undertook a programme of community engagement which received a total of 428 responses. Feedback found that 93% of respondents supported plans for the new Aldi store in this location. We consider that this proposal is a clear case where the benefits are such that planning permission should be granted. I therefore invite you to follow officer recommendation and resolve to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Before you start, I must point out that the time was nearly totally expired. As it's the two of you not had a chance to liaise on this, I will grant you another less than 1 minute maximum.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Evening, councillors. So my name's Harun Singh. I represent the Reading and Wakeham Seat community. So you may be aware we recently acquired Mizuno House, the office building right next to Halford. So we're in the immediate proximity of the development of Aldi. Just wanted to register our interest in support of this application and the economic development that it will bring to the area. We did have our concerns about the traffic coming out of Gazelle Close because a lot of our congregation will be coming to weekend programmes and using that access point, but given highways have considered it, we've got no concerns. I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Mr. Singh, thank you, and thank you again for your brevity. It's now open to questions for committee members. If you want to take a seat back in the audience, that's fine. I've got Bill, Rochelle, Tony, nearly everybody, Michael, Wayne, and Stuart's not being missed out either. By now, that's a full set. Okay, I'm going to go in order that I saw it. So I've got Bill, then Rochelle, and then we'll go around the others as we get to it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, whilst I have no objections to the development itself, my concern is, has already been mentioned, is the highways issue and the turning left. The problem there is that the number of vehicles turn left to exit that onto Reading Road. But they don't want to negotiate all the traffic lights around the Showcase Cinema, so they turn right into the Premier Inn site and do a U-turn and come out. That's the first problem, and that's been widely accepted as we can see a problem. The other problem is the actual entrance coming from Showcase roundabout to enter the site and turn right. The problem there is that if you look at the cycle lane on the inside, there is a broken line which allows cars to actually go into that cycle lane if it's safe to do so. A lot of motorists don't realise that that is allowed, and therefore they back up behind the cars waiting to turn right into the site. Now, with this increased traffic and taking peak times, I could see a situation where the traffic would extend down to the Showcase roundabout and cause considerable problems entering as well as leaving. And that's where my concern is. Okay, thank you.
Your response, I'm going to ask, does anybody else want to amplify any highway comments, and then perhaps Gordon can respond to them on Matt, if that's okay. So I think Rochelle was next in that case. Can we just, at this point, we just stick to highways comments, and if any others will come back around the table.
Wondering from the highways department whether they thought a traffic signal would be a good or a bad idea at that location. I have been to I have a tendency to go to the Pets at Home for my cats and my dog. So I will say that I've been in and out of that thing on a regular basis. It is a problem on a regular basis because you can only turn left. A traffic signal might help it at that point. I'm not an expert in highways, but I'd like highways to answer whether it would be a good idea to change the whole intersection to make it a three-way. So therefore, you have to change on the light, but also make it safe for cyclists as well, so they wouldn't block over that area.
Michelle, thank you. Again, on highways issues, we had Tony.
Yeah, it was, I noted that the various town council objections were regarding people illegally turning right at the Gazelle Road junction onto Reading Road. And I just wanted to ask Gordon, really, is it possible to create a traffic island in the middle there so that it obliges people to turn left? And would that improve matters?
Thank you. Al?
Yeah, just two things on highways. Yeah, as Bill's already mentioned about ingress into the cycle lane. I mean, shouldn't there be some protection for the cycle lane to stop that happening? And secondly, wouldn't the whole system work better if perhaps the speed limit was dropped to 30 miles an hour on that section of Reading Road?
Thanks, Al. Andrew?
Yeah, I'd like to just take a step back on this issue of safety at the junction and ask firstly, whether the safety of this junction is a material planning consideration in this instance. I think also, Mark, you may have said in your oral presentation that alternatives to the existing arrangements at this junction were considered, but were not adopted. I'm just wondering, particularly in light of some of the questions that have been raised, what some of these alternatives might have involved, okay, and also why they have been that they would not be pursued. This is, of course, premised on the assumption that this is a material planning consideration.
And does anybody else want to speak on highways matters before I do? Wayne and Michael?
Yes, just to echo what Bill said, I think you've only got to look at what the gentleman said in terms of Aldi as a supermarket. I think lots of people will like to have that store there, but I'm a bit amazed by the fact that and I was encouraged by what the gentleman said from the planner, that lots of things have been considered at this junction and that it was referred to as the status quo remain. I'm amazed by that, because all the points you've all raised, if you use it a lot, like I do, a frequent visitor to Wickes, not the Pets or Aldi, Halfords, people turn right, people turn left, they go into Premier Lodge. And those of us who were on the committee when the hotel was first the planning application come before this committee, we raised these concerns then. And we said, well, we'll see how we go. Well, we're back again. And if you use this a lot, all the concerns that were raised tonight about turning left, turning right, that middle junction, the cycleway, etc. These supermarkets are busy. They're not like going to Wickes or Halfords. This supermarket will be super busy because people like shopping there. And this is going to create a problem on that junction. But I don't want to say I'm against this application because I'm absolutely not. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Thank you, Chairman. I think kind of following on from a common theme here. I mean, Aldi itself is a very popular store. I mean, people will want to go there. They will want to take their cars there for their weekly shop. And you can see that happening. It will get busy together with all the other shops around there already, but Aldi will take this into a completely different league. It will be, I don't know how many fold more busier than it is now, and it is an absolute pain to drive in and drive out of there. Like Councillor Smith, I've done that many times. But I think reading the Highways Officer on page 65, and then also on page 4 of 11 of the supplementary, when it says that he is satisfied, or he or she, that he is satisfied that he will have an acceptable impact on the highway network with minimal queuing. And then you go along on the supplementary, and I quote, the Council's highways engineer is satisfied that the highway network can accommodate the vehicle movements associated with the development. I think looking at the figures here, and I've only just seen these tonight, but they do seem to be a bit on the low side. I find absolutely incredible. What does he think this is? It's just like a normal store. It is going to be busy. I mean, I think there's plenty of other stores around there anyhow. I know it's not a planning relevance, but I think it's great to have choice, and it is a good development. But it's just that junction makes me incredibly concerned about it. Thank you.
Michael, thank you. If I might finally have my comments on highways and then the officer. I think there's been several comments there which are, I think, highly illustrative. Andrew is right to raise the point that is this or is this not a material planning consideration? But all of us, I think, without question, support the general principle of development there and the coming of the store and the benefit of it to the community. But there's widespread concern about the nature of that junction. And the officer's report talks a lot about road capacity, which I understand is one of the technical assessments you have to do. But it doesn't mention the other options for improving the junction, which is not necessarily a capacity issue. It's more about flow and about safety. But we haven't been privy to what those other options might have been. And it is also one of those areas where if there is widespread concern about an issue, although it may not be a material planning consideration, it helps the work of this committee no end for some of those concerns to be addressed by Woking Borough Council taking responsibility on it themselves, as well as the public application. It helps us get residents on board with applications and gets community support, which is why I think we're all interested in it. You know, we're not technical transport experts, we accept that, but we have perceptions of risk and dangers that come from frequent usage of these roads. So that's I think it would be good to have comment above and beyond the technical road capacity comments about what could have been done to alleviate that junction, but specifically this risk of people turning right by default, either by ignoring the traffic signs at the junction or by dipping into the car park of the Premier Inn. Alan, we've got a lot to go through there. So if you can keep it to roughly 2 hours or so, that'd be fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I hand over to the High Engineer, there's just a couple of points perhaps which just to highlight. So Councillor's mentioned the safety of the junction, whether it's material consideration. I mean, yes, it is a material consideration. It is for you to take into account. What I would do is I would highlight paragraph 11 in the MPPF, which sets the bar in terms of what we're looking at here. And it said development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, excuse me, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. So based on the discussions we've had, we don't think any of those thresholds are met. We accept it will be busier, but we don't think that bar in the MPPF is met at all. So we, like I say, we accept it's busier. With regard, and when we were looking at this as well, I think this is probably the comments I've seen the most back and forth, where we were looking at, you know, options and doing it. I think we had sort of 5 sort of formal sets of comments back and forth. And there has been formal junction link modelling done, which we're happy with, modelling on the highway network. In terms of the alternative arrangements, I guess what I would say is they, first and foremost, they're not a material consideration. What's before the amendments are a material consideration. But the reason I alluded to them is because they were looked into, just, I guess, to give the members some comfort that we didn't just blindly accept what was in front of us and just went on. But they all showed worse queuing to the network, and they all pose different problems. And we didn't feel in any case the existing junction, like I say, was in contravening paragraph 11 of the MPPF, which I've just read out. So that was why we felt it's acceptable. I'll pass back to Gordon Adam, who can deal with some of the more technical matters that were raised on that.
Part of my response was mentioning the options that were looked at. What was looked at was a right turn lane out onto Reading Road. Next was that with a right-hand turn lane on Reading Road. The other was a mini roundabout on Reading Road. Fourthly, which wasn't modelled but was discussed at an early stage, was signalisation, and was felt that that would have an adverse impact on Showcase Roundabout. So that was not progressed. The other options went through the whole modelling process, and as yeah, there were lots of comments, went back and forth before I was happy with it. The mini roundabout was a no-goer because of the capacities on Reading Road that would impact on buses, etc. The next worst, if you like, was the right-hand turn lane, but it had its own problems with traffic waiting and traffic trying to get past. The right-hand turn lane out of Gazelle Close, it didn't operate as what we call it operational capacity terms and queuing as the original access. Mark mentioned the increase in traffic that could be in the PM peak. It's more likely that traffic will already be on the network, as in people going home and calling in to pick up shopping or whatever, and probably not new trips. So that's the options that were looked at. Talking about a legal right turn, the way it's done, the way it's laid out, you can't you travel up as if if you're going to turn left. If we looked at putting extensions in, it would probably go into Reading Road. It could possibly that we'll look at putting more no right turns marks on it, or no right turn signs, because that it is illegal, an illegal manoeuvre. Turning right, is it turning right from Reading Road? Was one of the comments? Coming down. Turning right from Reading Road. Coming down. Like any other priority junction, the priority is on Reading Road. So anybody will have to, and the Reading Road is quite a wide road at that location. So any cars coming southbound should be able to pass any car waiting to turn right. And then the car waiting to turn right will wait for a gap in the traffic and come and go past.
Sorry. It's difficult on that road.
Can we put the questions to the chair, please? Thank you.
that, you know, that's how we look at it in assessment terms. You know, with recognised traffic modelling, junction modelling that's been done. Hopefully that, with regarding a reduction of speed limit to 30 miles an hour, it's, you know, any speed limit has got to go to the police, and then the police won't accept, you know, a reduction to 30. We're in the same situation. Have I covered sort of everybody's questions in a roundabout way?
I think you've answered. I'll come back to the 2 points and Rochelle's, or most of the points there, Gordon. I'm grateful for that. And I think actually bringing those, if we can find some way of bringing those into the office report earlier, it might save for future development. It might save some time here, some questions, or some concerns. Did I hear you correctly saying that you thought if someone was coming south from the Showcase roundabout and wanted to turn right into Gazelle Way, there was sufficient space for someone to pass them on the inside?
I've done it.
When the cycle lane was first put in along there, it was a continuous white line which restricted any vehicle going into it. They found that caused a problem with vehicles turning right, holding up the traffic. So the broken line was put in, which means that the motorist can go on the inside, providing it's safe to do so. It's not really wide enough for vehicles to safely do that if there's cyclists around, and therefore they tend to back up behind the vehicle turning right. So I don't think that you can say that because the road is wide enough. I don't believe it is because of that safety issue to cyclists.
Well, thank you. Michael, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, it's just that I don't know if going back a bit history here, if people remember that junction used to be left and right hand at one time. Obviously it was changed, and I kind of guess it was for road safety issues, but I'm just wondering if I was looked at the information we had at that time to go back to that same sort of arrangement. I'm not saying it is the best one, but was it looked at in view of that it used to be that way many years ago? Thank you.
That was part of the options that was looked at.
Yeah. Kind of going back to the assessment, I just don't know why all this information is not in front of us now. Yeah. It's just nothing here. Why is it not here? It would cut out all these questions. Really would. It'd make our job a lot easier.
I think we have, and if we haven't, we should minute that as a request for future reports, that some of that technical data, albeit at headline level, would be extremely helpful just to sort of offset some of these questions in advance. I've got Al and then Rochelle and then Ryan.
Do you want me to
come back on?
So yeah, jump back on that, Chair. I think there is always a balance to be struck with how much technical information is provided in committee reports and appendices to members. Obviously, there are very technical disciplines like environmental health, highways, ecology, and so on, where the accompanying reports and assessments and workings out, if you will, that go into providing you with a summarised response in the report can be quite lengthy. And obviously, debating highway safety, for example, what are better options, is something that needs to be done by appointed highway engineers in advance of providing their conclusions to us to debate. To not have the conclusions or to present information to allow councillors and officers to draw technical highway conclusions would probably not be appropriate. So again, I think there is a fine line to be struck.
I think that's fair, Brian. I was just a recollection of a report we had for changing the course of a stream somewhere in Embrook, which had 300 pages of technical data on it, 299 of which made no sense to me whatever. I think on this instance, we understand roads. We're not technical experts, and we shouldn't be questioning the technical data. I think what we're looking for is some kind of understanding that issues have been looked at and considered, and we can sort of, in layman's terms, appreciate that.
Could I just ask again about, do you think the cycle lane should be protected there? I mean, it's got a broken white line, but shouldn't actually the cycle lane have a solid white line there?
If if there's no need for a vehicle to cross the cycle line, my own understanding, it should be a white line, solid line. However, if a vehicle has to cross over, like for example, going to a road or something like that, then it has to be, in my understanding, has to be a dashed white line to allow that vehicle to go across. That is my understanding. I'm not an expert on lining for cycles, but that is my understanding.
Michelle, and then Wayne afterwards.
Unfortunately or fortunately, I go down that road on a regular basis and probably several times a week. And getting past people who are trying to turn right into Halfords, really, is where they're going mostly, is a challenge at times. And I'm not sure if even if this going through the cycle lane would make that much of a difference on occasion, because they tend to stay over a little bit too far. And there isn't any room unless I can turn my car sideways and go down the road. That's about the only way I can figure out to get through there on occasions. Something does need to be done at a junction. I don't know what it is. You're a highways expert. Come up with some great idea, but it is something does need to be done there. I'm very much in favor of this thing, of this store coming in here. We need some choices with people having really problems dealing with inflation and food poverty and things like this. It's very important. And I really want to see this store coming in, but I also want to see something from highways possibly to give us a better idea of how to get up and down the Reading Road and not to cause queues all over the place.
Thanks, Michelle. Wayne?
Yeah, I think it's a real shame that we're getting to this level of detail, because we all want, I'm sure what I'm heard, we all want this store, and I'm sure all of our residents want this store. What we're trying to do is protect against flack on that junction. So, you know, whatever comes out of tonight, I want it absolutely documented. The various councillors that have said and were concerned about this junction. I would have thought, and what you said, Gordon, it's encouraging, and what the guy said from the planner, it's encouraging, but with all respect, Brian, we need that information in this document so that when residents are saying to us, you clowns, who designed that junction? Well, they looked at a roundabout and this. They looked at a right turn and this. They looked at this and this. We'll get to the cycle lane in a minute, because I do think you've got options to make that road bigger, because you've got some massive footpaths. And I think that would be a get out of jail card into decreasing the footpaths, making that white line a permanent white line so it can be enforced. So I think that, but to be honest, we shouldn't be discussing that tonight. We should be relishing this coming, praising it, and all the good things about it. It's all this because it wasn't in the report. We're debating it tonight.
Wayne, thank you for that. I think at this point I'll move on from highways and come on to other issues. I just will note in conclusion that one of the comments about the risk here was from the executive member for highways, and one presumably knows what he's talking about. I'm going to move on from highways to other points. Stuart, you've not had a chance to speak yet. So
it's probably going around the same thing, and I think Wayne said quite a lot of what I was going to say. One point though, I mean, if we've got some very smart drivers that do this UE via the Premier Inn, have there been any accidents? And if there have, presumably this means there will be more accidents. So therefore, again, on record that we're very concerned about this junction.
Stuart, thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments about non-highways issues? I mean, are we all happy about the situation regarding the floodplain and our engineer's report as opposed to the Environment Agency? Okay, so unless anybody has anything more to say, my sort of summing up on this is that we've got a lot of concerns about the highway situation, that we've made a minute that we'd like these more highways, some details of highway options at some level to be included in future reports, just to help inform us in our decisions early on. But we are where we are. So I think we now need to make a decision on this application, which I sense that most of us are materially in favour of. Brian, yes.
Yeah, just to jump in on the highways concerns that have been that the valid concerns that have been expressed and just the debate. I think it's worth noting that what we have in front of us is a proposal on a red line within Gazelle Close. It is not proposing any works to the highways, neither is any other application that may have been considered or approved in that area. And ultimately, the conclusions that are being presented to you via our highways engineers and in the officer's report is that no further works are required, and that if they were, they would be included as part of this application as a legal agreement to secure junction improvements. That's not the case. The highway capacity, the junction safety, no objection is raised, and that's as far as we can go. And then obviously it's for debate. Yeah, thank you.
Andrew first, then Mark.
Yeah, I'd like to ask I'd like to ask a question about informatives. Now, my understanding is that usually an informative would be directed to the applicant. But my question is, in this instance, in light of the discussion that we've had about safety of this junction, whether it is possible for this committee to make an informative to WBC. There's actually been quite a number of interesting suggestions made, that might help to improve the safety and allay some of the fears, about this junction. So, for example, Gordon, you mentioned possibility of additional signage, no right turn or other appropriate signage. There's also been concerns raised about the safety of users of the cycle lane. Again, that would be within the remit of the council, presumably, to explore, particularly in light, I believe there's a consultation taking place at the moment, about the cycle route between Showcase Roundabout and Woos Hill. Also possibilities, perhaps, although this was not raised, of some form of APNR. Monitoring of the junction. So my question would be, is it technically possible for us in this instance to make an informative, to include an informative, asking WBC officers, to investigate those kinds, of mitigating measures?
Thank you, Andrew. I think the purpose of an informative, as you've rightly said, is to bring the applicant's attention to matters which relate to that planning permission, not wider issues that may already exist prior to the planning application being determined. There is a risk of inserting any preference or requirement to consider, for example, alternatives within a decision notice, which may or may not be safer, better, would also commit resource to undertaking or fulfilling that requirement. It would also not be something that the council could necessarily enforce. It would have no legal force. Well, the applicant would not be inclined to do that because it relates to the applicant's planning permission, not us, as we are not the applicant. So I think there would be a number of risks there. Whilst there's nothing technically stopping any wording being put on an informative, it needs to serve the purpose of bringing the attention of the applicant to some matter which is dealt with under other legislation normally.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm struggling with this. I think like every other member here, I want to vote for this. I'm struggling to do so simply because of that junction, and I am minded to object to it, to vote against it on that matter. Can we not ask this application to be taken away and brought back to this committee at some future stage with a fully sorted alternative ideas for that junction? Because we are going to create horrendous accidents on there. I mean, I could envisage seeing deaths on there, I think particularly with cyclists. I don't want blood on my hands. I really can't support this application, but I want to. Because of the highways issue.
That is taking sort of a point of alternative proposition, Michael, which we ought to therefore follow in procedure. I think, if I may just, if you'll allow me for a minute, I think it's speaking to a wider issue, because I have been aware of planning applications in the past, and I'm certain there are some coming up early in the new year, where this kind of knock-on effect on highways may well form outside the technical province of the application itself, but is something that we as residents and we as councillors feel deeply concerned about, particularly the cumulative effect on junctions or on highways when subsequent applications come along. What I would like to do with the committee's agreement, and I don't know whether I'll take Madeline's advice whether we can resolve things as a committee, but to take that as an action way that we should discuss this with the executive member for planning, to say how is it that actions and concerns of the sort expressed here can be taken forward and discussed within the council without actually falling back on the more drastic option of having to reject applications that we'd otherwise choose to approve. Is that, Madeline, looking at you from Democratic Services, is that within our remit to do that?
You certainly could have a conversation, but it wouldn't necessarily buy into anything. But to kind of get ideas out there, you could have a conversation.
I know we can't put an informative, but can we ask Highways if they can come up with some answers? And for the future, can we get some ideas of all these things that you've wrote down? And, you know, some of the things that you have looked at, and in the planning application say we remove these ideas, and these are the ideas that we want to do. Because we've come up with these similar ideas on a regular basis. And at least you can tell us, you went through all of this stuff. These are the things we rejected, and these are why we rejected these ideas.
I think we can't get into the, we can't get into the detail of that tonight. We'll be here for a long time. What I'm going to propose is that if the committee's agreement is I do what I indicated, which I will take all of these concerns that have been expressed to the executive member for planning of the local plan and to the leader of the council with a request that we follow that up with a meeting through with the director for place and growth to actually better understand. Well, the director for place and growth covers highways and planning, with a view to just having a better understanding how we can log these concerns for the future in a way that is actionable within the council without falling back on having to vote against applications just in order to cover that point. Can I ask the committee generally, are you happy with that as a way forward? So with that in mind, Michael has raised the issue or raised a proposal that we should actually reject this application. Do you wish to continue with that, Michael, is that what I've just said?
I suppose I am saying that we'd be rejecting it. I don't want to. What I would say is, can they withdraw the application and come back again with additional proposals, solutions to that junction? And it's not really rejecting it. It's just saying I don't want to approve it at this time. I want to, but can you give me a reason to give it my support effectively?
Michael, thank you. I'm just going to refer to Madeline on process here, which is, do we take Michael's proposal to reject this first, or do we go to the officer recommendation first?
If Michael has a seconder and has set out a detailed reason, we can vote on that. But just to clarify, it sounded to me as if Councillor Berminger was asking the applicant to withdraw it, and we can't ask them to do that. So you would have to be asking that, proposing for a rejection.
Yeah, I from what I understand from the planner, it is. I agree, Michael. It's difficult, but and I'm only going on what I'm looking at him now, but I'm not expecting you to say anything. In his presentation, he said they work through lots of proposed solutions, and Gordon's outlaid what they've gone through, etc., etc. I think they were the willing party. I don't think we're sat here today with an applicant that said, if Gordon had said, we want we want a bit of this, and this, and they'd have gone to them regardless of the red line, because residents don't understand the red line, and we're the ones that have got to try and explain it, not officers, because we're councillors. But I just have a lot of sympathy if Mr. Williams has been doing all this work and we haven't seen all of that. He's the willing party. We're the ones with the issue here tonight, but I don't think that's going to get us anywhere, because if Gordon had said you've got to do X, they would have said okay. So I don't think it's Aldi's problem. I think it's our problem.
Okay, I'm going to draw this now to a close. We have a proposal from Michael that we reject this motion. Do you still wish to continue with that, Michael? And if so,
I think probably not in a minute, but I won't be supporting it in view of that.
I note your concerns, in which case we'll move to a vote on the officer recommendation to accept. Can I have a proposer for that? I have Al, and it's seconded by Bill. Can I ask those in favour? Those against? I think that no abstentions. Okay, in which case the application is approved. Thank you very much. We now move to agenda item 51, which is application 223691 for Latimer Road, Wokingham, and Benjamin Hill is the officer presenting. Sorry, can I just make a note from Madeline's point of view? I should have done that at the start of the last item. We should just make a note of those who attended the site visit. Yeah. Do you know who that was? You do, right, okay. Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair. Marvelous. I just skipped through. Enough not being prepared, my apologies. Excellent. So this is application 223691. This is at Lee Spring, 10 to 12 Latimer Road in Wokingham. Now, this is the full application for the proposed erection of 42 residential apartments in the 3 blocks. This includes on-site parking, semi-natural green space, amenity green space, biodiversity enhancements, waste storage facilities, and access will be retained to neighboring properties where lawful and to the garages to the rear. So the application site is located in the major development location of Wokingham. Now, this is right on the defined edge of the Wokingham Town Centre, as outlined in the 2010 SPD. So notably, to the west of the site is the Barkham Recreational Ground, which the site fronts. To the north is Barkham Road, and directly to the north, and most of note, is the Wokingham train station and adjoining bus link. To the right, circa 30 meters away, we have Queen's Gate, which is a major development for assisted living, with the Barkham Ride recreational ground allotments shown directly to the south. So here's some existing site photos of the building itself, the commercial building. So this is circa 1965. This is a mixture of Class C and B8 uses for storage and distribution. Now, this is in a state of disrepair, as it shows, and though I'm not an architect, this is of low architectural merit and quality. Moving forward, we can see the images taken from the other side of the railway, the other side of the tracks, as it is, showing the antisocial behavior through the presence of some nice graffiti there, shown in the picture to your top left. The existing TPO tree, which is to be retained and protected and integrated into semi-natural green space to the top right of your screen. To the bottom left, we have views from Wellington Road, which does show the tip top of the existing building, and to the bottom right of your screen, we have the existing parking court or part of it. So the proposed site layout is as follows. So this is a 3-block development. So this is mixed between 2 stories, 3 stories, and 4 stories. And this positively responds to the character constraints and neighboring amenity constraints, or any constraints by that effect, on site. The existing and proposed heights in section form are shown here. So this is nicely compared to Queen's Gate, again, around 30 meters away. And this shows the comparative height in the fact that the proposed development actually sits by virtue of lower ground level, nominally lower than the Queen's Gate complex itself. There's some nice CGIs here. So this is the aerial CGI showing our PV array on the rooftop. It shows how the fourth floor has been set back. It shows the design qualities of the proposal, and it also shows the integration and response in terms of design to the neighboring dwellings. So we can see block C to the far right of your screen. That's the 2-story block there. Centrally is block B, which is majority 4-story, but we do see a 3-story wraparound. And block A, which is right to the north west of your screen, that is our block A. And that again is a mixture of 3 and 4 story with a notable setback. So at street level, this is what we'll be seeing. I show here where this viewpoint is taken from. Now this shows how residents or future residents, should the application be approved, how they will interact with the proposal. So this shows that by virtue of the notable setback, the appearance of the building at street level is much lessened in if any appearance impact. So this is the proposed view, nicely shown in the TVIA submitted by the applicant. And this shows the view of the application site from Wellington Road. Now, we had significant discussions with the applicant. They worked very proactively with us to achieve this design iteration. And this broke up the form both vertically and horizontally, also utilizing the more modern material palette as seen in places like Elms Field, in Peach Place and Carnival Pool. Again, the last visual we just showed was probably the most prominent location of the site. As we can see from the Barkham Recreational Ground, which is nice green, major urban green space, we can only obliquely see where my cursor is now, if we can see that, just glimpsing through the trees. The recommendation is to grant approval, subject to the conditions and informatives listed within Appendix 1 of the committee reports, the completion of an associated Section 106 legal agreement, and the heads of terms have been agreed by the applicant, and that is contained within the recommendation of my committee reports. Alternatively, this is a 3-tier permission, so should the S106 not be signed within a period of 6 months, we request authorization to refuse the application on that basis. Thank you very, very much.
Ben, thank you very much. We have 3 speakers who it says here are virtual, but I'm pretty certain they're not. 2 are. Okay, I'll be given 2 are. So in which case, I'm presuming therefore by process of deduction, the 2 are virtual, Federica Dedra and Grant Leggett. Yeah, in which case we'll go in, is there a particular order we prefer? We'll go to the objectors first. Yeah, okay, so we'll go to the objectors first. So we'll go first to Sariko Dedra, who I believe is online. And Sariko, I remind you, you have 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for accommodating me. I'll be speaking today on behalf of the business Nisa Local, who own the land of the loading bay and the garage next to the proposed development on Latimer Road. We've previously made comments regarding how the proposed development will impact the daily running of the store, which we don't believe have been adequately responded to. The main point to be addressed is in relation to the logistics of the delivery vans of stock on a weekly basis, which are currently able to load into the loading bay at the rear of the property. The current response to our query states that the vans are able to stop on Barkham Road at the front of the store, which we addressed in our response, which is yet to be answered. The current road regulations on Barkham Road state that we have a 30-minute window for all the stock to be unloaded, which is not enough of a time frame for the large stock deliveries that we have at the store. In addition to this, we anticipate that unloading deliveries on Barkham Road would cause a large traffic block and impact the traffic flow on Barkham Road, which is currently an issue with the railway crossing at the time. In addition to this, the main point is that we require an acceptable path for the lorries to be able to unload and park into our loading bay at the rear of the property. The current response provided does not provide a safe route which will land into our loading bay without blocking the proposed parking spaces or the entry route into the complex. As per the current plan, the lorry will be required to stop in a location which will obstruct the current plans for parking spaces for the development and does not actually land in our loading bay at all. Finally, the proposed location of the refuse bins for the proposed development is extremely close to the store, which could have an impact on hygiene and smell for us. If this plan is to be accepted, then we will require all of the stated to be addressed so as to not impact our business. Until then, we will be against this proposal. Thank you all for your time, and we look forward to your response on the matter.
Sarika, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. I now ask Rachel Bishop Firth, who's the ward member. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Rachel, it's not you yet. I beg your pardon. I've been corrected by Madeline. It's Mark Legger next. Grant Legger next. Sorry, who's speaking in favour of the application.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Grant Leggett and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant. I'm a Director of Planning at Boyer in London. The application before you makes effective use of this highly sustainable site on the fringes of Wokingham town centre, replacing the existing poor quality buildings with a high quality building, which will deliver 42 homes very close to the services and public transport of Wokingham town centre. The scheme has evolved over the last half a year or so through dialogue with officers since June 2022, and that dialogue with officers has continued since the submission of the application in December. Amendments have been made post-submission, including reducing the number of homes and enhancing the design. And as confirmed in the committee report, which is very comprehensive, there are no objections from statutory consultees. The design responds sympathetically to the surrounding context, as Ben has already mentioned, whilst also optimising the brownfield site, relieving pressure on greenfield development, and also ensuring full compliance with the Borough Design Guide. The development's been designed to be no higher than Queensgate, also as Ben mentioned, which is to the north, and will also step down in height considerably towards the residential properties to the south and to the west. It's also set back from neighbouring properties and will meet the requirements of the Borough Design Guide with regards to separation distances. Each of the homes is a very high quality of accommodation. Residents will also be obviously very close to Barking Recreation Ground, where they've got sports pitches, play spaces and allotments. There are 34 parking spaces for the 42 homes, and this has been agreed with Highways as being an appropriate amount of parking for a location so close to the town centre and the train station. All the family units will have an allocated space, and the proportion of parking, by the way, is consistent with other recent town centre schemes, and residents will also be encouraged to use sustainable transport through on-site cycle parking, travel plan and access to a car club. There was also a comprehensive employment land report submitted with the planning application that demonstrates that the proposal will not cause any harm to the overall supply of employment land within Wokingham, because the development extinguishes the employment use of the site at the moment. But the current buildings represent only a tiny fraction, 0.4% of the total employment floor space within the borough. And the report demonstrates that there's a significant amount of industrial and office space currently available in Wokingham, and there is anticipated to be a surplus of employment space up to 2036. Of the two current tenants, just for the record, Simpson Spring are moving to the recently completed Falconwood Business Park, and Lee Spring are moving to a new higher quality facility and actively looking in the borough as well. It's also been agreed with the council's independent viability assessor that the scheme is not viable and can't support any affordable housing. However, the applicant has agreed that there will be a late stage review mechanism secured through the 106 agreement. As you'll also be aware, members, and forgive me for this, you'll have heard it before, the tilted balance in the NPPF is engaged in the borough due to a lack of 5-year supply. And this, of course, requires planning permission to be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. In this case, the development will deliver a significant suite of benefits that are set out in the committee report, which Ben has alluded to. And the committee report also confirms in the officer's judgment that these benefits outweigh any adverse impacts, and therefore planning permission should be granted. Obviously, we agree with that recommendation heartily.
Mr. Legge, I'm to ask you to wind up. You've had 3 minutes, so
last
I'll ask you to
paragraph,
summarise
forgive
one
me, Chair,
sentence,
often-
please.
Yeah, we're grateful to officers for their collaborative work to the project. The officers have been excellent, by the way. And I think it's worth mentioning that now, and we look forward to
Thank you for your
bringing this
contribution, Mr.
development
Legge.
forward.
I appreciate that. Right, we now move to Ward Member Rachel Bishop first. Rachel, I apologise for saying to you earlier.
How long have I got to speak? Because we've had two speakers.
You have 3 minutes.
I've got 3 minutes. Fantastic. Okay. So thank you very much. I mean, this is a proposal which originally came to the Planning Committee last year. And I'd like to thank the developers for their work on this and the officers for their comments. I think we do need homes for Wokingham residents. I think we would like to see homes built on brownfield sites where possible. So I'm quite sorry that I'm speaking against this particular proposal because I just think it's too big, this particular proposal for this site. The Wokingham Borough Planning document points to CP3 sets out that all proposals must be of an appropriate scale of activity, mass, layout, built form, height, etc. to the area, and not cause detriment to the amenities of adjoining land users, including open spaces or occupiers and their quality of life. This is a proposal to shoehorn a bulky square mass of a 4-storey building in between small 2-storey Victorian terraced houses on Barkham Road and 2-storey 1960s maisonettes on Latimer Road. This is a largely residential area. Most of the other buildings are 2-storey. There are a few 3-storey buildings, and a 4-storey building would completely change the character of this area. We've got a number of artists' impressions of the proposed buildings. None of them show what it would look like close to the 2-storey homes, which will be right in front of it. There's a picture on page 175 of the pack that we've got this evening. It shows how the building would absolutely loom over the houses on Station Road, and these houses are further away from the site than the neighbouring houses on Barkham Road and Latimer Road. The proposal states that we should consider the housing on Elmsfield and Outfield Crescent as comparators. I don't understand that argument, I'm afraid. Elmsfield and Outfield Crescent are at some distance from this site. Everything in the immediate vicinity of the proposed development is 2 stories, except for the Queensgate Retirement Home, which is only 3 stories. I also note that the flats in Elms Road and Outfield Crescent have got the top stories of the housing within a number of individual pitched roofs, and this significantly breaks up the mass of the buildings. We only start to see flat roofed 4-storey developments similar to this one quite a bit further out, where you've got the junction of Wellington Road and Finch Hampstead Road. So if this proposal was to go ahead, it would be the only 4-storey flat roof building in the immediate area. My second issue relates to the Woking Borough Planning Document point CP6, which covers managing travel demand. I'm very concerned about the access and parking for this site. There wouldn't even be 1 parking space for each flat in an area where there's already a severe shortfall in parking spaces for those living along that part of Barkham Road who've got no parking at all outside their houses. If we had such a large number of homes with either 1 space or no spaces at all, it's going to seriously affect most of those living in the area. And then finally, the access. As I live quite close to this site, it's difficult for residents to turn out onto Barkham Road at peak times of day. If you add another 42 homes, that's going to significantly increase the pressure. There's very little traffic goes in and out of that industrial site at the moment.
Rachel, yeah. Finalise now, please.
Okay. Can I bring to the end by just saying I'd love to see a proposal for a smaller development on that same site, preferably one that would include some affordable housing.
Rachel, thanks so much for your contributions. Right. Do I have anybody on the committee who wishes to speak or ask questions? I've got Andrew, Michael, Rochelle, Tony, and probably others as we go. But Andrew, you were first. So.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I consider this application to have many merits. I am surprised that nobody thus far this evening has raised the issue of the viability of the project, and also the measures that are being agreed with the applicant for a late stage viability review with any profit sharing. This is a method that this committee has supported, in a number of recent instances, and I accept the independent assessment and the confirmation by our own valuers, about the relating to the viability and the suitability of this, proposal. I do want to raise just two questions, though, and the first is I'd just like if officers could just explain to me a little bit more about Sarika's concerns regarding the impact that this might have on, if this was to be approved, that this might have on the parking bay for her business on Barkham Road, because I couldn't quite understand or envisage exactly what the issue there was. And it is something that, I'd really like, to understand better. And the second question is, it's about the scale, of the development, a matter that Ward Councillor Rachel, has raised. The councillor included the phrase that it's too big, for the site. I'd just like if there's any sort of comparative data about how the density, of this development. I think it's something like 114 units from memory. How this would compare to similar developments in the vicinity, of the town centre. So 2 questions at this stage, please.
Thank you. So Gordon, if you don't mind, we'll cover that first point on the NISA local access. So I'll defer to him.
Thank you, Ben. As part of any assessment, we look at access of a vehicle can turn into the site and manoeuvre safely in the site, and therefore leave the site in forward gear. As part of this assessment, the developer used a articulate HGV of 16.5 meters, which is the largest vehicle around, and it could safely turn. The actual site to the storage, the unloading bay, is slightly south of that, and the lorry wouldn't be that big. And I have had a look at it, and a normal delivery vehicle, which I've seen parked outside Barkham Road, would definitely be able to get into their loading bay without blocking the access.
Now, in terms of density, the one example I referred to in my officer report was 19 to 21 Marketplace. Now, this is very much a town centre scheme, so therefore densities will inherently be slightly higher, but this sits at 160 dwellings per hectare. So comparatively speaking, the site is far lower than that, which provides, again, we'll get into space standards later, I'm sure, but yes, a better internal amenity for future occupiers.
Thank you for that.
Minute said, Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. Really on parking provision. When we had Mr. Grant Leggett was on, he said that there were spaces, 34 parking places provision. I think that's right. I think I got 34. And you look at 42 residential apartments. Now, going on to what Councillor Bishop-Firth was saying, I think kind of reiterating what she said, in that you are going to have inadequate parking provision for people living there. And now it's all very well saying, oh, they're going to use public transport, they're going to walk there, they're going to cycle there. And you're also going back to the weekly shop. And if they want to go down to Lidl's, they're not going to walk, are they? They're going to get their car out. If they can't park, where are they going to park their car? It's going to be chaos around there. I mean, I think Councillor Bishop-Firth made a very, very good point about having a smaller development and with affordable housing. Now, later on, it says in the report that was not even considered, and it was divvied out. Well, this is what Wokingham Town Council was saying, in that it was passed out to a third party. I find that absolutely incredible. That was passed out to a third party. Why did not Wokingham Borough Planning Officers look at that as well? I'm not very happy. Thank you.
Michael, thank you. We've got Rochelle.
My major concerns are the amount of parking. Because again, there are going to be people who are going to, there are people who are going to have cars. I mean, they're not going to not have cars. It says they're going to be 7 car-free units. Well, that's very good to say that, but that still leaves 27 unallocated spaces. Okay, who's going to police the fact of somebody who has 2 cars and somebody has 3 cars, and it's going to be chaos. I've lived in places where they supposedly have not enough spaces, and it is always chaos if you don't move your car, get in there before they do, and it creates real fights with neighbors as well. It's just not a good idea. That close to town, no one is going, people will walk to Waitrose possibly, but not everybody can afford to go to Waitrose. And it's just not, it's too many houses, not enough parking, period.
Bill, thank you. Tony?
Yeah, I most of what I was considering has been brought up by Councillor Mickleborough, but I really was unhappy with the way that they've got out of affordable housing by the agreement that we had, I think a month ago, where there's then this late stage viability review. I just wondered whether people on this committee will have presumably come across these before, the planning committee, whether there is ever any review that where it's found that the council is going to be paid some money towards affordable housing, or whether it's just something that's put in as to placate the committee and get it through, sort of thing. It's unfortunate that the figures have been created, presented to in such a way that we don't get the affordable housing produced.
Tony, thank you. Is there anybody else with any comments they want to add to it? I've got one myself. In case I have my comments in, and then Al, do you want to go? Okay, Al, you're next. Then I'll go in. Then we'll give the chance to respond.
Okay, I think, I mean, to say that we've supported these is a bit rich. We support these offsets affordable housing. I mean, I think we've had our arms twisted to support them. This committee hasn't come out in great praise of these schemes, so I think we ought to note that.
Al, thank you. So I'm going to add a couple of comments on myself, come back to the office, and then we'll go around a second time for a show. I want to come back first to this question that was raised by Ms. Dedra about access to this store. I mean, she's gone to the great length to come to the meeting tonight and raise what seems to be a very valid concern. And you've mentioned there isn't a problem. I'm surprised that wasn't done in conversation with her before this meeting. It seems to be black and white. She can get delivered to a store or she can't. If she can, all well and good, I'm very content. But if the alternative is that she has to put a very large truck on Barkham Road a couple of hundred yards from a level crossing, and that's an absolute nightmare, that would be a very serious concern. So Ben, can you just sort of comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. So a reconsultation was issued around 1 month ago, and that contained the sweat path details, which clearly identified that the largest Arctic delivery truck on the roads can safely maneuver in and out of sight. It can access the delivery bay. That was sufficient detail for us to override that objection. And I think the content of the objection from the individual who spoke this evening, that pertained around the fact that they ran the plans by their HGV driver who said it might be difficult. Now, just because something is not convenient, that does not constitute a highway safety concern, and that would certainly not constitute an objection on highway grounds on this basis.
Okay, thank you. I'm just concerned that she clearly thought it was a concern and we haven't managed to allay her. I take your point, and if there's vehicle access is there, it's there, and that's good, but I'm just still concerned that she seems to think it isn't. I think that if we can come back to two issues that have been raised by many members. The first is this question of parking. There are other questions to be answered here about that, but I mean, I'd just ask, is there a current policy within Wokingham about how we define flats or apartments that have non-allocated parking spaces? I mean, is this something that's actually set down so we understand what we mean and how it operates, or is it just a sort of a kind of a phrase we use?
So as far as I'm aware, Gordon, please correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have a strict calculation. It is a case-by-case assessment considering all site-specific circumstances. In this case, it was considered that due to the incredibly high sustainability of the site, connections to public transport, the actual scheme would benefit from having more unallocated parking spaces, because in these locations, contrary to popular belief, as I've seen this evening, not everybody owns a car. Not everybody's preferred method of transport is a car. Times are changing, times are progressing. We have strategy policy 6 that clearly outlines we are seeking a modal shift away from the private motor car. And schemes like this come forward in accordance with this policy. This policy was reviewed by members at the time. This was adopted. This is a development plan policy, and this is in accordance with said development plan policy. So on this occasion, considering the sustainability of the site, not everyone will have a car, and those unallocated parking spaces, rather than being tied to a dwelling where they would sit unused, and that would exacerbate a problem, it creates flexibility, which is what we need in these town centre locations or sustainable locations to that degree.
We're saying this is a kind of a first come, first serve for parking. It's not like apartment 2's got a parking space, but apartment 3 hasn't. This is just if you're first in, you get a parking space.
Except for the 7 car-free units, as part of their lease, it'll be there. They'll not have a car as how car-free units normally work. For the remaining unallocated, it is, as was rightly said, it is not permanently. If a space was allocated to apartment A, it's permanently allocated to apartment A, whether the occupier of apartment A has a car or not. Nobody could park in it because it'll have apartment A on it. It will stay unused and it'll exacerbate the parking. What this development has got, apart from the family units, all the other, and the 27 and the 7 car free, all the other have unallocated parking, which is present elsewhere in the borough. And we do it when we assess the parking, we assess it as unallocated and allocated parking. And because of where it is situated in one of the most sustainable parts of the borough, next to the station, next to the bus, and just outside the Wokingham Town Centre SPD, which does encourage using lower parking standards. That's where we've come to that decision.
Thanks, Gordon. Tony raised the issue of the dreaded financial viability assessment. I can accept the fact that this is a brownfield site, which does incur more cost to develop than greenfields where we've had previous issues. But the one and I also note in the supplementary that we do talk about the S106 profit share coming into play. Is there anything you want to add to that, Ben?
Yes, at current, we do not even have SPD guidance for a profit share scheme. We do not have policy guidance or policy as it is for a profit share scheme. In this respect, the applicant has agreed that if there is any speculation on the figures within, this has been checked again, and I'll reiterate, by a third-party professional. Viability assessment, I shan't say it's a dark art, but it's not an art that we can view and we can simply tick the box and say we understand. It's deeper than that. We need professionals to look into that, and they have looked into that. And the best possible outcome in this situation, considering the fact that viability is a material consideration, is this late stage review mechanism, which again will assess the as-built costs, and then we'll proceed on that basis.
Yep, please do.
Yeah, thank you, David. And just kind of get in response to the councillor's comments of why viability assessments are determined by third parties at this council. There is a lot of complexity, as Ben has said, and there's a lot of variance inherently inside these viability assessments. And in order to provide clarity to you as members and accountability, any viability assessment, it is the expectation that any viability assessment is prepared by a professional with relevant credentials and is assessed by someone that is a suitably qualified practitioner. Planners are not quantity surveyors. We are not valuers, the same way we are not highways engineers. So planners are generalists, and we bring together all the different relevant disciplines to present you with a detailed report in order to make your decision. The inputs and findings in viability assessments can be disputed, as they often are, by parties, developers, objectors, you name it. But ultimately, if it's been signed off, we have to accept that. And we're not necessarily in a place to dispute that because it is not our professional discipline. So I hope that clarifies why we do this. Some councils, quite a few councils, have their own internal valuers who are qualified, who sit within the council and provide that service internally. Wokingham does not have that, so we need to go external. Thank you.
Brian, thank you for making that clear. Rochelle, you wanted to come back? And then I've got Michael. Anybody else want to speak after Michael? Wayne?
Okay, on page 164 and 165, they show the fourth floor has these large balconies. I'm just wondering, where do these balconies overlook? Is it the railway line, or is it somebody else's garden over there? And we were afraid of having a third story overlooking somebody's garden, and this is a fourth story overlooking somebody's garden. The second comment is, Wokingham Borough happens to be one of the largest car-owning boroughs in the country. And assuming they will only have one or no cars is not a viable choice, because people do that. And they may not want to go on the bus to go to the store. They may not want to go on the train to go to the store. They like to drive for the most part. Wokingham is unfortunately famous for that. And having at least one space per dwelling is reasonable, even if they're unallocated. But having no spaces and having car-free spaces doesn't really work unless you're in London. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I did mention about affordable housing. I've not actually had a response on this one. It is noted on page 99, officer note, this has been subject to a third-party viability review, and in this respect complies with CP5 of the core strategy. What my question is, why did the council not do the review themselves? A third-party review seems to indicate to me, and I am not a professional in any such, that indicates money being spent when we could have the resource here. Okay, and I've got another point as well, and this is kind of getting on to what Rochelle was saying earlier on. This is a constrained area. Now, it does seem to me, if you have more parking places, adequate places, then you will have less apartments, which might well kind of make it a reduced development, which might keep everybody happy. And cars. Well, not everyone will drive a car there. We're mentioning cars. I don't know what world we're on sometimes, but what about vans? People use vans for businesses. They might live there. They might not have a car. They could have a motorbike. I know people got motorbikes and vans. It's not just cars. It's the whole economic area as well. And we're just making it incredibly difficult for people to go about their lawful business in their own way. I don't like the nanny state. I don't like telling people what to do. And also we got visitors. Now, where are they going to park? You got one space, yeah. Or you're going to park on the, well, no, on the road, it's all double yellows, isn't it? So where are they going to park? They might not say, we're not going to bother going to see our auntie because we can't park anywhere and we can't get the train because it's unreliable. They're always on strike. It's just absolutely crazy. You've got to have a lesser development with adequate car parking. It has to be the number one consideration. If you don't do that, I think you're rather failing. Thank you.
I'll come back on some of those in a minute for me, but Wayne?
Yeah, I won't comment about parking. Can I just go back for one moment about the lady who has the shop on the Barkham Road? And I know that it's been said it might not be convenient. What's proposed might not be convenient, but if it is legally possible for their vehicles to come in and turn. I presume that the lady in question has a right of way, and that's why it says right of way, transfer zone, etc. And then you've got bin storage, bin holding storage there. And I would imagine that's probably what's causing her issues in terms of the flexibility of that truck getting in and out safely. But the one big thing nobody's mentioned, and it's my favourite one, is the whole bulk scale mass of this development. It took me a while to actually get my head around where it was until I pointed out that it was opposite the car wash. But we're sitting here tonight, and I think we could have done ourselves a massive favour by going on a site visit for this one and trying to park, and then and then having a look at all these things that have been mentioned, including Mrs. O'Dedra, including the street scene as that that Rachel mentioned, etc. Because again, we're looking at plans, we're not looking at this in the flesh. So I would propose that we have a site visit on this one.
I'm going to ask the officers have made the point. There's a whole pile of issues built up, and I've not given them a chance to respond. So my apologies to that team, and I will come back to them. I will try and help by rounding a few issues up. I think we are where we are with the viability assessments. We've discussed that before at numerous meetings. Unless there's a change in the law, I can't see us getting much further with it. It is established that we turn to third-party professionals to do these assessments. We've accepted that in the past. None of us like it. I think we're correct to record our dislike of where we are, but it's going to require government legislation to change, and there's not much we can do about it here, regrettably. I think it's also worth saying that I know personally of a number of flats within the borough which don't have allocated parking spaces. I know that because my daughter occupies one of them. Admittedly, she didn't expect to get stuff for 500 quid extra parking charges by Wokingham, but that's another story. But we do accept within planning that some housing units in the town centres do not all have allocated parking spaces. And if that is explicit in the leases that are bought or taken out by the incoming tenants, then they know what they're buying into. And I think we have to bear that in mind. If this is an issue of policy challenge within the council, fair enough, but there's another place to change that, and that may be fed maybe into the local plan update process. But with those points, Brian and Ben, I'll pass that back to you.
Thanks, David. Just to sort of wrap up to give a kind of response to a number of different questions on parking. This is a similar debate that we do have on town centre and sustainably located developments. The NPPF local plan, our local plan, is crystal clear in promoting alternative modes of transport and encouraging a shift away from private vehicles. Not everyone lives in a house with 3 parking spaces on a driveway, in suburbia. We have inner urban areas, we have suburban areas, and we have countryside in this borough. So our policies need to reflect that, and they do. The site before you is probably one of the most sustainable locations we've had at committee, if not being on top of the station. It is intersected by north, south, east, west, and mainline railway. The point you made, David, about buyer beware, that is absolutely correct. And ultimately, the type of housing being proposed here is not housing that you would expect about 35 seconds from the station to be well furnished with private parking. There are public car parks in proximity. If you are living or visiting, as with anyone visiting a town centre temporarily, you can make use of whatever on-street or off-street parking is available. There are significant alternative options here for residents. And if a prospective buyer or renter decides to move into a flat that's been marketed in the town centre with no parking, they will be fully aware moving in that their choices will be reflective of the fact they don't have a vehicle. There is also a controlled parking zone out the front of the site and along, I believe, Barkham Road, except loading bays for the NISA local and anyone else who wishes to pull in to use the shops. So again, it is not a situation where this development will result in people parking directly outside the site. They can't unless they apply to us for a parking permit, and then our parking permits team will consider whether they should be given one. So that kind of wraps up that series of questions on parking. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in terms of overlooking, as outlined within the committee report, we are in excess in every dimension possible of the Borough Design Guide recommendations. Now, these are the minimum requirements. The proposal exceeds this. Absolutely. So either side, we're entirely compliant. There's a full table again within the committee report, which breaks down every single facing dwelling. It breaks down the minimum recommended separation distances, and it shows full compliance. And the fact that it actually exceeds this 95% of the time, and that's applying very cautious standards. And this is the guidance that officers, again, are using to base their decisions. This guidance is there for a reason. And as it's in excess, we cannot object on overlooking grounds, other than maybe the perception of overlooking, which again would not substantiate a reason for refusal.
Are there any further comments from or questions from any committee members? Yeah, I've just, sorry, sure. Yeah. If there are no other questions or comments, I'm just going to have one of my own and sum up. This, as far as I can see, this application is pretty much policy compliant. We do get somewhere, there are somewhere there's a bit more balance than others, but it's difficult to find many clear breaches of existing planning policy within this application. We may not like some of those policies, particularly about car parking, but they are current policies of the council, and there are other places to challenge those and to change them. It's not the remit of this committee to change policy. But fundamentally, to me, this is a town centre development, and the alternative to town centre development and higher density developments in town centres is that we build on more green fields. And we've seen many applications before this committee for greenfield development that we've vigorously opposed, or at least tried to. When you change the higher density development in town centres, changes the nature of the location. That is unavoidable, and that's not always easy to accept for the people who are currently there. But all town centres are dynamic, they change, and this is a change that we're seeing taking place within Wokingham at the moment. And I find it quite difficult to argue against a high density development that's in a very sustainable location right on the doorsteps of the station, and with very easy access to shops and other amenities. It's the sort of things to me that we should probably be encouraging, although not unquestioning, rather than dismissing. So if there are no further comments, then I'm quite happy to propose to the committee that we accept the officer recommendation and approve this application. Is anybody prepared to second that? Got Al? Good point. Hold that thought. I'm trying to, I'm very happy to do a site visit. I'm just trying to wonder how that's going to help us when we're trying to imagine a 4-storey building in place. Yeah, Brian then Madeline. Yeah.
Yeah, members have been provided with quite a comprehensive pack, which contains a significant number of photos. A majority of the photos that are included in the pack are not from the public realm. So they're not necessarily, for example, looking across a railway line from adjoining development. It's there to give context of where this site is located. And as you would note from the location plan and the satellite imagery, there is only one. Realistically, as a pedestrian, you may see the top of it at distance near the station, but you also see the top of the existing commercial buildings on site. But when you are on Latimer Road, there is only one sort of street level view you're going to see of this development up the access road. And obviously at the moment, as the photographs show, there is a fairly uninspiring commercial building on that site. Again, it's not taking the example of the Gazelle Close. That is a place where there is a lot of footfall and visibility, and therefore seeing the site in context is valuable in that regard. And in this regard, we believe that it's better used to provide site photos and the diagrams to members.
Yeah, there are many instances where I've found site visits to be incredibly helpful. For all the reasons that that Brian has just cited, though, I think in this particular instance, given the lack of visibility, from publicly accessible sites, the amount of visual imagery that has been provided, I do not believe in this instance, that a site visit would help to help us to clarify any of the specific concerns, that have been raised. So I would not be in support of that.
Wayne?
So let's test it.
You're right, as committee member. So you're proposing if I put a deferral pending a site visit?
Yeah.
So do we have a seconder for that? Michelle was first. So can I have those voting in favour of deferral pending the site visit? Those in favour? That's 5. Those against? 4. So we need to have a reason. We need, sorry, I should refer to that first, but we need to have a reason for the site visit. Wayne, can you give us a?
Well, I did lead on bulk scale mass. I did go into the point about the access, the point that Mrs. O'Dedra had an issue with. So I wanted to just see that on site. I wanted to look at the various points around, there's a mention of a lay-by for cars to park. I wouldn't mind looking at that at the same time. So there's quite a lot.
Well, I think we have to take the site as best we can get onto it. That's for the officers to.
Yeah, we can arrange access to the site. It's
okay. So the decision of the committee is that that application is deferred to the January meeting pending a site visit. Okay. Thank you all. We now move on to the next application, which is item 52, application number 231524 for Heathlands Farm. And I'm running out of bits of paper. Who's speaking on that one? That is Marcus.
So bear with the chair whilst we just share. I need to share the presentation because we have a issue.
A laptop's broken.
Yep.
Thank you. This is application number 231524 for the proposed installation of 1,762 solar PV panels, each mounted on 4 concrete footings on an agricultural field at Heathlands Farm. Heathlands Farm is located to the southeast of Wokingham Town Centre and north of Crowthorne. As can be seen on this aerial photograph, the solar panels will be sited on a contained field within the wider farm site, which is surrounded by development associated with the farm to the north, east and west. Beyond a green buffer to the south are further agricultural fields occupied by polytunnels. The site is currently occupied by 11 polytunnels. The proposal would replace these larger structures entirely and are arranged in 15 arrays, which are spaced out evenly and minimises the overall bulk of the scheme. The proposal respects the existing boundaries of the field and does not encroach into open countryside. All associated paraphernalia will be sited in the main farm buildings immediately to the north of the site, rather than on the application site. Through negotiation, additional landscaping has been agreed, including a rewilding of the field to create a meadow and the planting of a hedgerow on the site's eastern boundary. This further softens the visual impact of the scheme and secures a biodiversity net gain following the development. Details of this are secured by condition. These are the elevation of the proposed panels. While their height and appearance is reflective of its function, sitting just below 2.5 metres high, due to the appropriate siting and bulk of the development, it is not considered that they would introduce any adverse visual harm. The closest potential public vantage points are from Honey Hill to the east, due to the mature trees adjacent to this boundary and the intervening development. Any view of the solar panels would be extremely limited. Therefore, visual impact on the wider landscape is minimal. The principle of development is supported by national and local policy relating to sustainability and the provision of renewable energy. The proposal is well sited within the existing farm and is on an appropriate scale with no adverse impact on the immediate character of the area or on the wider landscape while supporting a sustainable rural enterprise. No adverse impact to other material considerations, including neighbour amenity and highway safety, has been identified, while improvements to the scheme, including significant biodiversity enhancements, are being secured. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and informatives listed at Appendix 1 of the committee report.
Thank you, Marcus. We have no speakers on this item. So do we have any questions from committee members? I've got Bill. Anybody else?
In my ignorance, when these solar farm or solar panels deteriorate in time, and no doubt they will, the standing of them and rusting, and they are no longer of use, who is responsible for the removal of them? And will the land then be returned to agricultural land, or has it become then a brownfield site? What's the situation?
The situation is that the condition 3 listed on Appendix 1 states that once the generation of electricity ceases, as in they're not operational anymore, all panels and any associated development, including the concrete footings they sit on, have to be removed. That would be the responsibility of the applicant or the landowner in the future if the farm gets taken over, for example. The site then returns to an agricultural field. This does not become a brownfield site, no, because in a sense this is essentially temporary development connected with an agricultural use rather than anything else.
Rochelle, anybody else want to speak up to Rochelle? No.
No, I think it's a really great idea to put a solar farm there. However, I'd also suggest that they consider in the future, when they're removing these are out of date, put some new ones in there and do it again. We still have the same problem with climate change. We're going to have the same problem for a very long time in the future if we still have a planet at the rate they're going with at the COP conference right now.
It's my understanding we can't put conditions on future use, but yeah.
It was surely a suggestion. That was all it was.
Yeah, and we can't enforce that in any way, but of course that is an option available to them as they're aware.
Okay, if there are no further questions, then at the risk of being unusually brief, could I ask someone to support the officer recommendation? I've Andrew, someone to second it, or Rochelle. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Phew, thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 53, which is application 231561 at Shinfield Studios, and Christopher Howard is the officer doing the presentation. And he's online.
I'm just hopefully loading this up. Just bear with me for 2 seconds. Can you see the slideshow going through in the chamber there?
We can, thank you.
In the Dynamics room, sorry, apologies. Thank you for that. The application is for the relocation of the temporary workshops located at Shinfield Studios to a permanent position to the north of Cutbush Lane. The building will serve as a supporting facility for the studio function, including set building spaces. Planning permission for the wider site was granted a couple of years ago, and much of this has been delivered on site. In terms of the wider studio site, this is shown here outside, shown outlined in yellow to the east of Shinfield. This has been delivered with much of it being built out since the satellite image was taken. The site was for the workshop, which is broadly outlined in red, and this would be accessed by the Eastern Relief Road through the internal roads serving the studios. These are the site photos which are taken from recent drone footage in October. The blue arrows show the area of the site where the workshops will be relocated to. The photo shows the extent to which the site has been delivered from the previous slide. The workshop was set on the area of land that has been identified as high standing under the previous approval for the outline scheme. This is the site plan showing the context of the workshop in respect to the wider facility. The block plan to the right shows the building footprint. These are the plans of the facility. The height of the workshop would be around 6.2 metres to the eaves and 10.2 metres to the ridge. The building would be 50 metres wide and 25 metres deep. The photo to the right shows a temporary workshop in position on the Science Park campus, so it kind of gives we have delivered earlier, so it gives a really good impression of the appearance. Whilst the land where the workshop would be relocated as designated as countryside, as set in the report, this is changing character of implementation of the main studio site. As such, no significant harm is envisaged. The recommendation is to approve the application subject to section 106 requirements as set out in the appendix and amended as the supplementary agenda, together with the conditions. Should a legal agreement not be secured, it is recommended to refuse the application for failing to secure the necessary financial contributions. And that's it for the presentation.
Christopher, thank you. Does any committee member have any questions? Thought we were going to get away with this one. Rochelle, and then Michael.
Just nice to know that Woking is going to be the Hollywood of the UK. So it's always good that we're doing things positive, and there's also a good place for a lot of apprentices to learn the trade.
Can we please not go there? Yes. Michael, please take us somewhere else.
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, I'll certainly try my best with that. I think, yes, I'm actually in favour of this, so I will be voting for it. And I think Rachel's made some very, very good points there. But it's just really, and it's appeared on quite a few times, there are three of us that live in Early, and Early has been spelt without the E, E-A-R-L-Y. And if that winds Early people up, which I'm sure more than anything, it's seeing that. So please, it's one of the major towns in the borough. And if we can't spell it correctly, then I think there's no help.
Apologies, that's my oversight. I won't even blame on dyslexia.
I expect this may have something to do with audio typing on Word, but anyway. Yes. Do we have any? Al?
Well, just point out that given that we gave planning permission to where this for building where this workshop is now, it'd be pretty churlish not to allow it to move.
I think I'm going to strike while the iron is hot and suggest we accept the officer's recommendation. Do I have a proposer for accepting the officer's recommendation? I have Michael, a seconder in Rochelle. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. If you can instruct the media, you're a better man than me, but that's what I can say. Just before we completely wrap up, although the meeting is now formally closed, there was. Sorry, wait for the film to stop.